Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're with us again, it means you're already doing something absolutely essential in this information environment we're all in.
You're being skeptical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're that person who's looking at just the fire hose of noise coming from mainstream Western institutions, the corporate media, government bodies, the academic world, and you're asking the right question.
Which is, what am I not being told?
What key facts, what crucial perspectives are being, let's say, carefully curated out of the picture?
And that desire you have, that gut feeling that you're not getting the whole story, it's more than just healthy. I mean, it's really the foundation of all critical thought.
But we have to talk about a vulnerability that comes with that.
We do. Because that vacuum of trust, the space that's created when you stop trusting those established institutions, well, that space is the #1 target for very sophisticated influence operations.
Your curiosity, your frustration with how things are, that can be weaponized. It can be used to guide your thinking if you don't see the mechanics of what's happening.
And that's what we're here for.
Right. In our last deep dive, we sort of laid the groundwork. We looked at the structure of this English language project, Russia Up Close. We saw how they set the mood, how they established credibility.
Now we're moving into part 2. We're dissecting their second episode, which really doubles down on this idea of moral authority and identity politics.
So just to be clear, our mission here isn't to argue about policy. It's to dismantle the psychological operation, the PSYOP brick, by very calculated bricks so you can see how it's built.
We want to give you actionable knowledge. We want you to see the very specific, very subtle ways these influence peddlers try to shift your moral perspective.
How they expertly, and I mean expertly, obscure the grim reality of Russia's unprovoked aggression against Ukraine.
And they do it by focusing your attention on things that are very relatable, moral and social issues happening right here in the West.
So let's jump right in. To really get how they guide the audience, we have to look at how they set up the moral baseline. This isn't about politics or maps, not at first.
No, the very first thing they do in this second episode is establish a spiritual and emotional premise. And they do it with a voice that is instantly recognizable to their target audience.
Let's talk about the Tucker Carlson monologue. The hosts, Joseph Schultzman and Eddie Gonzalez, they don't just play the clip. They frame it right away as absolute gold.
They say it defines the show's entire ethos. So they're not just sharing a popular clip. They're basically applying a moral mandate to the entire conversation before it even starts.
Think of it like a heavy caliber rhetorical weapon.
That's a great way to put it. It's strategically placed right at the beginning to seize the moral high ground. It's designed to create this tone of transcendence, of universal values, to make the audience feel like they're above the messy details of geopolitics.
And the core message they pull from Carlson is that there are no permanent enemies.
Right. And they don't just present that as good advice. They escalate it. They call it a Christian imperative, a prerequisite for continuing to exist as a civilized society.
And they don't stop there, do they?
Yeah.
They go straight for one of the most powerful narratives in the Christian world.
The prodigal son. It's instantly relatable. Carlson points out, the son acted like a total asshole. He did indefensible stuff. He wasted his inheritance.
But the point of the story, the greatest joy, is reconciliation. It's when he comes home.
And what's so fascinating here is the specific psychological mechanism they're using. We call it emotional preloading.
Okay, break that down.
By starting with these universal, deeply resonant values, common humanity, forgiveness, Christian duty, they force you, the listener, to frame the whole discussion that's about to happen in terms of a high moral obligation.
So reconciliation becomes the supreme goal.
It becomes the supreme goal before you even get to a discussion about accountability.
So if I'm listening to this, before I've even had a chance to think about the facts of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I'm being told that my highest moral calling, the thing that proves my faith, is forgiveness and reunion.
Regardless of the indefensible stuff that was committed.
Wow.
Precisely. And this is a masterclass in what's known as moral reframing. They use this universalist, faith-based framework to build this soft, appealing, but ultimately inescapable no permanent enemies worldview.
And the psychological impact is what?
It prepares the audience emotionally to accept a narrative that just erases accountability for specific crimes, for the violation of sovereignty, for the brutality, for the destruction of civilian life.
So reconciliation isn't something that's negotiated after justice. It's a moral duty you have to perform first.
Exactly. It's mandated by your faith. It completely shifts the conversation from who started this aggression and who is currently violating international law to a very different question.
Yeah.
Who is being moral enough to forgive and reconcile?
And the subtle but really problematic implication, which is aimed right at the skeptical Westerner who is already sick of being lectured, is that if you hold Russia accountable for its actions, for its unprovoked aggression, you're actually the one who's failing a fundamental Christian imperative. You're the immoral one because you're insisting on having a permanent enemy.
It's an incredibly sophisticated weaponization of faith against critical thinking. Look, nobody's arguing that forgiveness isn't a virtue. It is, but
it's earned.
It's earned, or it's negotiated, after accountability has been accepted and consequences have been addressed. This narrative just bypasses that entire messy, necessary process.
It's a shortcut.
It's a moral shortcut. It tries to force a mindset where reconciliation is the highest goal, which then justifies overlooking the profound moral weight of the initial aggressive act. It sets a temperature where any criticism of Russia is going to feel cold, harsh, and fundamentally unchristian.
Even if that criticism is based purely on observable facts.
It doesn't matter. They weaponized your own values to disarm your geopolitical scrutiny.
Okay, so from that foundation of moral universalism, they immediately pivot.
Right. They transition directly into an analysis of Western behavior, and specifically, they accuse Americans and Westerners of being trained to think in a binary format.
The black and white thinking. Cowboys and Indians, left versus right. They say it's baked into Hollywood and our media.
And they create a very strong contrast here. They present this Western way of thinking as fundamentally childish, almost primitive, and they contrast it with Russia's supposed focus on multipolarity.
Referencing things like the BRICS initiative.
Exactly. Things designed for cooperation and, here's that word again, reconciliation. The U.S. approach, they argue, is rigid polarity. It's drawing a line in the sand. You're either with us or you're not.
You can see how that would appeal to a listener who's just exhausted by the endless polarization in their own country.
Oh, absolutely. This narrative of a mature, multipolar world seeking harmony sounds incredibly sophisticated and appealing. They're positioning the West as the ideological purist, the rigid one, and Russia as the pragmatic adult in the room.
But this is where we really have to stop and expose the massive, undeniable contradiction in their own message.
Because the technique here is textbook projection and inversion. They are accusing the West of the exact same rigidity and binary thinking that an autocratic state, by its very nature, imposes on its own political environment.
We're about to hear from their first guest, who literally argues that a strong leader is necessary to avoid chaos.
That is the ultimate political binary. One strong hand or total collapse. There's no middle ground.
And then when you look at Russia's actions on the world stage, this claim of avoiding polarity it completely falls apart.
It disintegrates. They accuse the West of drawing a line in the sand, but it was Russia itself that designated Ukraine as an existential enemy. Despite decades of peaceful coexistence, despite treaties guaranteeing sovereignty, Russia launched its unprovoked aggression.
But that's not multipolarity. That's the most definitive, most violent act of drawing a line in the sand that you can possibly imagine.
The inversion of responsibility is total. It's profound. They erase the cause, which is Russia's invasion of a sovereign nation, and they focus all of the audience's attention and moral outrage on the West's reaction.
The sanctions, the condemnation, the aid to the country that was attacked.
And they frame that reaction itself as the emotional and ideological failure. They call it polarity. They distract you from the primary offense by obsessing over the secondary and, frankly, justifiable response.
Which brings us to the point that we have to be absolutely clear on, especially for the skeptical learner who is trained to look for facts, not feelings.
Right.
Nobody in the West, it doesn't matter if they're on the left, the right, or in the center, is evaluating Russia emotionally or binarily in this context.
No, Russia is being judged. And it's being judged solely by its actions.
It's unprovoked aggression.
Its brutality, its destruction of cities that it claims it wants to liberate, its blatant violation of international law. That judgment is based on things you can see and verify. It's not based on ideological purity.
The West's response isn't some Hollywood movie with good guys and bad guys.
Not at all. It's a pragmatic, you could say proportional reaction to a state that used overwhelming military force to violate the borders of a peaceful neighbor. If the Russian state wants to talk about sophisticated multipolar cooperation, then it has to demonstrate that principle.
By respecting sovereignty.
By respecting the sovereignty of every other nation, including Ukraine. Until that basic principle is back on the table, all this talk about binary thinking is just a rhetorical smokescreen. It's deployed to deflect responsibility for their own highly aggressive and polarizing actions.
It's the classic move, isn't it? If you're guilty and you can't defend the action itself,
You attack the person pointing it out.
you attack their legitimacy. It's pure deflection, but it's packaged as high-minded moral philosophy.
And now we move to the proxies.
The guests, the people who come in to lend credibility and a human face to the operation. The first one up is a man named Filin.
He's a popular Russian blogger, runs an English-language channel called A Russian Opinion. The hosts introduce him very warmly. They note he has a growing family.
But his persona is critical here. He's the moral anecdotalist. He's the anti-Western immigrant narrative all rolled into one.
And the background details are, they're telling. He uses a stage name. His real last name is never revealed. He reportedly holds more than one passport. He grew up in the U.S. and Canada, was even sent to a private military academy.
And now he lives in Russia, but he seems to have a freedom to travel that many ordinary Russians don't.
Which makes him the perfect bridge between these two worlds. He can speak to a Western audience with authority because he grew up there.
And he dives right into the argument for needing a strong, centralized power, which, again, completely contradicts that earlier idea of multipolarity.
Completely. Filin argues, very explicitly, that Russia needs a strong leader like Putin because it's a big country. And without good management, he says, everything falls apart.
And he points to the 1990s.
He uses the real chaos and instability of the 90s as proof that this is the only alternative. This is that binary we talked about. Stability under autocracy or chaos under a budding democracy.
But he needs the audience to believe that the state's permanence is essential for national survival.
He even makes a direct comparison, contrasting Putin with Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. He calls Trudeau a fluffball who nobody would respect.
And that's a very effective comparison for his target audience, who probably already view Western democratic leaders with a lot of skepticism, if not outright disdain.
Oh, it's a home run with them. But we have to add the necessary context here.
Go ahead.
At the time this source material was made,
Wow.
Justin Trudeau was a democratically elected leader. He operates within a system of checks and balances. Leaders come and go. They serve their terms. They face elections.
And the institutions, the courts, the free press, the political opposition, they remain. They are robust.
That is how democratic systems are designed to function. And it's a world away from the argument that a single, permanent, strong leader is the only thing standing between a country and total societal collapse.
So he's using a critique of Trudeau's style.
A very popular and, for many, a valid critique.
To validate an entire system of permanent, centralized authority.
Exactly. He's using a valid complaint about performative Western politics to sell a system where genuine dissent is basically impossible. And then he pivots very quickly to social issues. This is where he really locks in that conservative Western audience.
Abortion.
He goes hard on abortion, calls it the murdering of children. He uses a comedian's analogy, Bill Burr's pie analogy.
I think I know this one.
You know, it would have been a pie if you'd let it sit there and cook. It's a very visceral way to illustrate the sanctity of life. And he claims that in the U.S., abortion has become a hot-button topic and even a form of contraceptive.
Implying that in Russia, they're returning to more traditional values.
Right. He is hitting every single moral and social nerve that his audience has. He's connecting Russia directly to their deepest conservative values.
He also gets into cultural comparisons, right, about women.
He does. He contrasts what he calls traditional, family-oriented Russian women with women from the Soviet bloc who moved to the West. He says they adopt Western freedoms but still expect a man to provide for them.
So they want the best of both worlds, in his view.
In his view. And he argues that this pursuit of a childless, career-oriented life is just a temporary pleasure that leads to misery down the road. He is validating their entire worldview. Russia is the bulwark against the moral and cultural decay they see in the West.
But now we have to talk about the elephant in the room.
The massive unmentioned elephant.
Filin talks about God, about morality, birth rates, femininity, history. He covers every single moral issue that he knows will resonate with his audience.
But he consciously, conspicuously, and completely avoids mentioning Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine.
Not a word.
Not one. And this is the genius of what we call the moral shock absorption technique. He's building a fortress of common moral ground faith, family, tradition, all around the listener.
And once you're inside that fortress with him,
Once you accept that Russia is the guardian of your most precious moral values, you are far, far less likely to question the massive ongoing military action happening right next door.
this shared moral alignment becomes a justification for ignoring the moral outrage of the aggression.
He convinces you that the nation at its core is a moral guardian, which makes its external actions seem either secondary or maybe even a necessary evil.
Okay, so after Filin's moral appeal, we get a segment called I'll Tell You What, with the co-host, Eddie Gonzalez.
And this is where the rhetorical inversion, the one aimed squarely at American skepticism about foreign policy, is fully deployed.
He makes a really bold claim. He says the U.S. stopped being a nation and became the world's morality police.
Exporting cultural fashion, a secular catechism through all its funded NGOs, consultants, activists, soft power.
He has a great line. He calls the U.S. a global homeowners association with nuclear weapons.
It's razor-sharp rhetoric, isn't it? It takes something huge and powerful, the U.S. global footprint, and it makes it sound petty and bossy and annoying. It taps right into that justified distrust many people have of U.S. interventionism.
And then he does the big inversion, the soft power inversion.
He asserts that Russia isn't exporting anything. He says no one in Russia is knocking on doors in Nashville trying to convert the American South to Orthodox Christianity.
He claims Russians are uninterested in controlling how anyone else lives.
And this is a textbook false equivalence. And it requires a really clear factual counterpoint because it's a deliberate attempt to make Western soft power and Russian hard power seem like the same thing.
They're not.
Not even close. Russia doesn't really have or need soft power in the way the U.S. uses it. When the U.S. government uses soft power through an agency like USAID, it's funding things like HIV prevention, famine relief, infrastructure projects, medical programs.
And when Russia wants to exert influence over a sovereign neighbor,
what does it send? It sends tanks. It sends mercenaries. It sends little green men. It sends military occupation. That is the literal definition of controlling how someone else lives.
so exporting, cultural fashion, as irritating as some people might find that, is in a completely different moral universe from exporting a military occupation.
A different universe. Gonzalez then tries to explain away the concept of Russophobia, framing it as this irrational emotional hatred that's directed at Russia just for being Russia.
But the truth is much simpler than that, isn't it?
It's incredibly simple, and we have to say it clearly. No one tells Russia how to run its own domestic affairs. The world only reacts with sanctions, with condemnation, with diplomatic isolation when Russia invades another country.
If Russia had stuck to diplomacy.
If they had just decided not to violate Ukraine's sovereignty, there would be no war with Ukraine, a country it coexisted with peacefully for decades. The world is reacting to violent actions that broke fundamental international rules, not to Russian culture.
And the segment wraps up by telling the U.S. to drop its moral badge and focus on its own problems at home.
A collapsing roof, unsecured borders, dirty cities. The argument is that nations respond to strength and dignity and example, not to lectures.
And what's the psychological goal of that final move?
It's designed to create moral fatigue in you, the listener. By pumping up the perceived failures and moral hypocrisy of the U.S., they make Russia's aggressions seem like a smaller, more distant issue compared to the moral collapse happening in the West.
The implicit message is,
if your own house is falling apart, you have no moral authority to judge your neighbor, no matter what they're doing. Therefore, the West's condemnation of Russia's unprovoked aggression is illegitimate because the West is morally compromised.
it's designed to paralyze your ability to apply moral judgment externally by turning all your anger inward.
That's it, exactly.
So next up, they bring in another guest, John Henry Weston. He's the CEO of LifeSite News.
Right. And he is positioned perfectly. He's a traditional Catholic, a father of 8, a very well-known figure in conservative, faith-based media. And, this is crucial, he was invited to Russia by both the government and the church.
So he's not just some random guy. He's an internal Western validator.
He provides the perfect moral authority shield for the whole operation. His presence immediately takes the conversation out of the realm of geopolitics and elevates it into a cosmic struggle for civilization itself.
And he validates this whole Russia as a refuge narrative.
He does by listing Russia's positive social changes. banning pornography, dramatically cutting the abortion rate, and he's very specific. He says it went from 2.5 million to 500,000, and he notes this includes chemical abortions, which he says the West fakes its numbers on.
He also mentions the ban on LGBT propaganda.
And protecting children from what he calls the trans phenomenon and deadly lifestyles. And he wraps it all up by calling Russia a culture striving for health.
This is pure value laundering.
An excellent term for it. By aligning Russia with these deeply held, non-negotiable conservative and religious values, life, family, traditional morality, the narrative successfully swaps out the image of a brutal aggressor.
And replaces it with the image of a stable, misunderstood guardian of civilization.
And if you're a listener who cares deeply about those issues, you've just been given a massive emotional reason to align yourself with Russia, completely separate from its foreign policy.
Weston also talks about his own experiences, right?
Yeah.
Being called names for his views.
Yes, and this is so important. He connects his own feeling of victimhood, being called a coward and a traitor for not participating in what he dismisses as blue and yellow virtue signaling. He connects that to a much bigger philosophical struggle.
He calls it a pursuit of truth amid diabolic disorientation.
And that phrase, diabolic disorientation, is drawn directly from Catholic prophecy. It refers to a time when the faithful are confused and manipulated by the highest authorities in their own church. He's elevating this from a political disagreement to a spiritual war.
He also contrasts his own old-fashioned journalism with what he calls lazy and unintelligent arguments made by AI tools.
Which serves two purposes. First, it validates the listener's own sense of being persecuted and marginalized in the West. And second, by using these apocalyptic spiritual terms, it reframes the whole geopolitical situation as a battle for the soul of Western civilization.
A battle in which Russia is positioned as an unlikely but necessary ally.
Which leads him to his final, powerful theme, the Catholic-Orthodox alliance. He says he feels more affinity with the Russian Orthodox Church than with his own mainstream Catholic leadership under Pope Francis.
Because of compromises on issues like family and LGBT rights.
Exactly. He argues that it's time for Christians of different denominations to band together to fight for life and family.
And this moral alignment provides the ultimate off-ramp, the ultimate justification for just ignoring Russia's unprovoked aggression.
It's the whole point. If Russia is the last major state on Earth actively defending the core values that matter most to you, then what it does on the international stage, no matter how harsh or violent, becomes either irrelevant or a necessary part of defending civilization from a greater spiritual evil coming from the West.
It's the ultimate emotional shield. It gives you permission to be silent about the invasion.
The irony, of course, is that he's a traditional Catholic, a group often very wary of state power. And here he is, validating a state because its social policies happen to align with his faith, while completely disregarding that same state's most profound and damaging action, its unprovoked military aggression against its neighbor.
The moral case is made so strongly that the factual geopolitical case is just rendered moot.
It's designed to be.
Okay, so the final piece of this puzzle, the final guest, is Richard Lee Wilson.
Right. An American-born actor, he's been living in Russia since 2013. He's had success in their film industry. He positions himself as a cultural insider, a translator of identity and values.
And he's a close friend of one of the hosts, Eddie Gonzalez.
Which adds that layer of personal trust and familiarity for the audience.
And he launches into this multi-layered critique of the West.
He does. He talks about systemic Russophobia.
Right.
He claims that basically every Western book about Russia is Russophobic, that they all use the same tired, negative tropes: depression, alcoholism, violence.
He criticizes that Western habit of always seeing Russia as behind.
Yeah, he talks about archofuturism, this idea that Russia is stuck in the 14th century but with nuclear weapons. It's a very dismissive view that he's pushing back against.
And he has some heavy criticism for the U.S. political system as well.
Very heavy. He argues the parties only care about Wall Street and GDP growth, and that they're pathologically obsessed with overturning governments throughout the world.
He also makes an interesting cultural distinction.
He does. Between Rosky, which is ethnic Russian identity, and Rozan, which is being a citizen or member of the Russian state. And he says he prefers Russia's problems. He prefers the genuineness of the non-smiling Russian demeanor over what he sees as a fake, transactional, smiling American facade.
Now, his critique, especially that part about the U.S. political machine, focusing on external enemies and GDP instead of his own people.
That provides the perfect launchpad for us to really dissect the implications of weaponizing patriotism.
And this is crucial for understanding the core mechanism that militarized societies use to justify aggression.
Yeah.
We need to break this down into 5 points.
Let's do it. First point. Patriotism is weaponized. Its main job stops being about building up your own civil society or improving quality of life at home. Instead, almost all of its energy is funneled into justifying foreign military action, like Russia's unprovoked aggression or projecting power externally.
So patriotism becomes a tool for foreign policy, not a tool for making life better at home.
That's point one. Point two, hatred becomes the glue. It becomes politically convenient, sometimes even necessary, for the state to survive by constantly manufacturing an external enemy. This conflict, whether it's prize of Russophobia or whatever, it becomes the emotional fuel holding a huge, diverse nation together.
It's easier to unite people against a common enemy than for a common, complex goal.
Way easier. Which leads to point three, critical thinking dies. In a system that runs on hating a manufactured enemy, if you dissent, if you try to find a more nuanced view, you are immediately branded as unpatriotic or weak or a traitor.
It suffocates any real debate or internal accountability.
Yes, it's designed to. Which brings us to point four, the empire syndrome. External conflict and foreign adventures start to replace real internal development. Wilson's critique of the U.S. only caring about Wall Street and GDP fits perfectly here, a state focusing all its energy and money on its military and its global influence, instead of on the roads and schools of its own citizens.
And that leads to the fifth and final point, the big takeaway.
This is the crucial insight for you, the skeptical learner. If a country needs a constantly manufactured enemy, the external threat, the anti-Western obsession, to feel united, what you are seeing is not healthy patriotism.
It's a militarized society.
It's a militarized society running on emotional fuel and manufactured grievances instead of real, stable progress. It's a system that's engineered for perpetual conflict, because without an enemy, the whole reason for the state's current structure starts to fall apart.
That analysis really gives you the tools to look critically at any form of nationalism, whether it's in Russia, the U.S., anywhere.
And ask that key question. Is this patriotism being used to build society up? Or is it just being used to fight external enemies to maintain internal control? It's a critical distinction.
Which brings us to our final synthesis of this deep dive into Russia Up Close Part 2. We've tried to meticulously expose how this project builds its narrative. And it's not through factual debate.
No, it's through a very effective emotional and moral architecture. Part 2 has shown exactly how Russia Up Close uses religious language, how it leverages these anecdotal immigrant stories from people like Stan Filin and John Henry Weston,
And how it relies so heavily on the moral reframing championed by the hosts and their experts.
The whole strategy is what we've called emotional laundering. And it's all designed to hide the one thing they never, ever dare to mention or justify, Russia's unprovoked aggression against Ukraine.
While they build this really glossy storefront, one that's based on faith, family, and guaranteed stability, we've tried to reveal this cynical, calculated machinery that's operating just behind it.
They're successfully positioning Russia as the moral refuge you need to escape a chaotic, collapsing West. It's a powerful argument for moral flight, not for political accountability.
And this focus on guaranteed stability, on the need for a strong leader to avoid the chaos of the 90s, a point that Stan Filin made so emphatically. It leaves us with one last critical question for you, the skeptical learner, to really think about.
When a state organizes its entire society to avoid chaos, by definition, it is demanding a trade-off from its citizens.
So the question is this: how much personal freedom, how much independent critical thought, and how much democratic process is a citizen expected to sacrifice in exchange for that guarantee of stability?
That potential trade-off freedom versus guaranteed stability, that is the real binary choice at the heart of their entire discussion.
We'll leave you to explore that question, to continue seeking the truth, decoding the messages, and looking beyond the very compelling storefronts presented by these sophisticated influence operations.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We encourage you to keep rigorously analyzing the sources you encounter and to return next time as we continue our mission to decode the information landscape.